Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: more than half of Gaza's population is now crammed into a town on the Egyptian border. Japan's NISA program fuels index fund price war. The carry-on star who helped the Great Escape. An urgent work that creates parallels with the war in Gaza. Tuesday's time schedule. More than half of Gaza's population is now crammed into a town on the Egyptian border. Associated Press. According to United Nations humanitarian monitors, Israel's evacuation orders cover two-thirds of the Gaza Strip, or 246 square kilometers. Over half of Gaza's population is now crammed into the town of Rafah and surrounding areas. The health ministry in Gaza stated that a quarter of Gaza's residents are starving and 85% of the population has been driven from their homes. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that hundreds of thousands of people are now living in makeshift tent camps. Japan's NISA program fuels index fund price war. Nikkei Asia. Japan's expanded tax-free investment program has sparked a price war in the securities industry as asset management companies compete to offer low-fee index funds that have become popular among retail investors. The popularity of low-cost index funds means asset managers and brokerages in Japan's mutual fund industry will face greater pressure on profit margins. Management fees for index funds have already declined from 0.46% in 2017 to 0.37% at the end of last year, but still remain higher than the 0.12% expense ratio for passive funds in the US. The carry-on star who helped the Great Escape. BBC. An identity card belonging to Peter Butterworth, the star of 16 carry-on films, is to go on display as part of an exhibition at the National Archives in London. The card reveals that Butterworth served as an officer and code writer in MI9, the military intelligence agency responsible for organizing escapes from prisoner of war camps during the Second World War. Butterworth was involved in both The Great Escape and The Wooden Horse, both of which were adapted into films. The documents released from a German archive have been catalogued by volunteers. An urgent work that creates parallels with the war in Gaza. The Sydney Morning Herald. Yumna Kassab's latest book, Politica, explores the weight of unacknowledged history, the politics of resistance, the multiple truths of war, and the safeguarding of selfhood in the face of blatant dehumanization. The book is structured as a series of vignettes that delve into the lives of characters affected by war, displacement, and violence. Kassab's storytelling approach is fragmented and polyphonic, capturing the urgency of the subject matter. The book refuses to cast moral judgment on its characters and instead focuses on the individual stories of endurance, defiance, and love amid mass violence. Tuesday's time schedule. Associated Press. The article lists the NBA and NHL games scheduled for Tuesday, February 6. It also includes the top 25 men's and women's college basketball games of the day. Alibaba's 80% loss may extend on competition worries. Bloomberg. Options traders are forecasting further pain for Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba, with the options skew showing increased bearishness ahead of the company's earnings report due on Wednesday. Alibaba's shares have tumbled nearly 80% from a 2020 record high, with persistent deflationary pressure and declining wages driving a price war. Stalwarts Alibaba and JD.com face new entrants including Douyin Mall, while discounters like Pinduoduo are winning in the price war. Alibaba spent $9.5 billion on share buybacks last year, and may spend half of its free cash flow on buybacks. Thailand faces bitter battle over downsizing powerful military. Nikkei Asia. Thailand's civilian-led government is under pressure to scale back the armed forces after nearly a decade of military rule, but analysts warn that the drive is sure to face pushback from the country's politically powerful generals. At UN, Russia brings U.S. election into Mideast attacks and U.S. vows to respond to Iran-aligned groups. Associated Press. Russia has accused the U.S. of aggression against Iraq and Syria, claiming that it is an attempt to salvage the Biden administration's image ahead of U.S. elections. Blinken pushes for enduring Gaza peace deal in Riyadh visit. Financial Times. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has held talks with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh as part of the U.S.'s efforts to broker an enduring peace deal in the Middle East. Blinken's trip to Saudi Arabia is part of a larger tour that includes stops in Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and the West Bank. The U.S. considers the normalization of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel as a crucial step towards resolving the crisis in Gaza. Blinken is also trying to make progress with a proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages held by Hamas. However, his visit comes at a time when there are concerns that the U.S. could be drawn into a wider regional conflict triggered by the Israel-Hamas war. The U.S. recently launched retaliatory strikes in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen in response to attacks on American troops and ships. Prospects shaky for Philippines government and communist peace talks. Al Jazeera. The Philippine military and communist rebels are continuing to fight despite an agreement to resume peace talks this month in an effort to end the world's longest-running communist armed rebellion. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. surprised many when, in November, his government announced an agreement with the National Democratic Front, NDF, the rebels' political wing, to restart peace talks that his predecessor Rodrigo Duterte had ended shortly after taking office. Since then, however, contradictory statements, public bickering and continued armed clashes between the military and the New People's Army, NPA, the Communist Party's armed wing, have tarnished hopes of an agreement. Many in the military apparatus, and especially within the government's controversial anti-communist task force, still want to finish off the armed conflict by physically wiping out the NPA forces, Sader Ocampo, founder of the leftist Bayan Muna party list group, told Al Jazeera. The Philippine government and NPA have been engaged for more than 50 years in a conflict that has killed more than 40,000 people. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world, here to bring you the latest news from across the dimensions. Let's dive into today's headlines. In Gaza, the situation is dire as Israel's evacuation orders cover 2/3 of the Strip, forcing over half of Gaza's population into the town of Rafah and surrounding areas. The health ministry reports that a quarter of Gaza's residents are starving, and makeshift tent camps now house hundreds of thousands of people. It's a heartbreaking situation that demands immediate attention and action. Meanwhile, in Japan, the expanded tax-free investment program has sparked a price war in the securities industry. Asset management companies are competing to offer low-fee index funds, which have become popular among retail investors. This is great news for investors looking for low-cost options, but it puts pressure on the profit margins of asset managers and brokerages. It's a race to the bottom, and we'll have to see how it plays out in the long run. On a lighter note, an exhibition at the National Archives in London will feature an identity card belonging to Peter Butterworth, the star of 16 Carry On films. What's fascinating is that this card reveals Butterworth's involvement in MI9, the military intelligence agency responsible for organizing escapes from prisoner of war camps during World War II. Butterworth played a vital role in The Great Escape and The Wooden Horse, both of which were turned into films. It's incredible to uncover these hidden stories of heroism and bravery. In the literary world, Yumna Kassab's latest book, Politica, is making waves. It explores the weight of unacknowledged history, the politics of resistance, and the multiple truths of war. Kassab's fragmented and polyphonic storytelling captures the urgency of the subject matter, focusing on the individual stories of endurance, defiance, and love amid mass violence. It's a poignant and thought-provoking read. Turning to sports, the NBA and NHL games are heating up tonight, and college basketball fans have a lot to look forward to with the top 25 men's and women's games of the day. It's a great time to be a sports fan, with plenty of excitement and nail-biting moments. Now, let's shift our attention to the business world. Alibaba, the Chinese e-commerce giant, is facing further losses as options traders predict a gloomy future ahead of the company's earnings report. The rise of new competitors and a price war have taken a toll on Alibaba's shares, which have plummeted nearly 80% from their peak. It's a challenging time for the company, but they've been proactive in buying back shares to mitigate the damage. In Thailand, the civilian-led government is under pressure to downsize the armed forces after a decade of military rule. However, analysts warn that this move will face strong opposition from the country's politically powerful generals. It's a delicate balancing act that the government must navigate. On the international stage, Russia and the US are exchanging accusations at the UN. Russia claims that the US actions in Iraq and Syria are aggressive and motivated by political image building ahead of the US elections. It's a war of words that adds to the already tense situation in the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Riyadh, pushing for an enduring peace deal in the Middle East. His visit to Saudi Arabia is part of a larger tour aimed at resolving the crisis in Gaza and fostering diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. However, with the recent retaliatory strikes and concerns of a wider regional conflict, the path to peace remains uncertain. Finally, in the Philippines, peace talks between the government and communist rebels are off to a rocky start. Despite an agreement to resume negotiations, contradictory statements and continued armed clashes have dampened hopes of an agreement. The conflict, which has lasted over 50 years, has claimed the lives of thousands of people. It's a complex issue that requires delicate diplomacy and a commitment to finding a peaceful resolution. And that wraps up today's news. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through the headlines of our multidimensional world. Now, it's your turn. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions or opinions to share? Let's open up the discussion and explore the different perspectives together. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.